everyone, my name's Harold.
And my name's Braden.
And we're here to talk trikes.
I have plenty of customers that come in for the first time.
Sure.
They come from the biking industry. They're looking to get into a trike. But before they even start looking, hey, why would I ride a trike when I've been riding a bike for so many years? What are my advantages of switching to a trike?
So a recumbent trike is going to be more stable than a bike. And thus, it's one less thing to worry about. And it's also going to be more comfortable than a bike, of course. A lot of the trikes here have some sort of padding or recumbent seat design. So you're going to be sitting in a reclined position instead of having to stay leaning over, which is not comfortable at all.
I'd sit on these recumbent seats, padded, unpadded mesh seat, way before I sit in a biking seat.
Of course, and then you could ride for longer as well, because you have all these endurance riders that can ride in that position for longer, and that's requires a lot of core strength. But riding in a reclined position is not going to be as intensive. So you can take a ride out longer, feel better about it, and maybe even get a better workout.
Sure. You talked about stability for a minute. I'd like to talk about it a little bit longer.
Sure.
You said 3 points of contact, giving you a lot more sturdiness. Brings you on a recumbent trike. You are generally speaking a lot lower than you're going to be on a two-wheel bike.
Right, so your center of gravity is going to be right in between those two front wheels, at least in the tadpole design. If not in the Delta design, you're going to be in between that. Most stable is going to be in that tadpole design. So your center of gravity isn't going to be swaying too much. Of course, the higher you go, even on a tadpole, is the more or less stable it is, but it's still infinitely more stable than just balancing in between two wheels.
Sure. And worst case scenario, if you do end up tipping one of these over, which is very hard to do, you have to almost try.
Right.
You don't really fall that far.
No, I mean, it's going to be a lot less catastrophic if you're falling from maybe 6 inches from about, a couple feet up.
Sure.
You mentioned earlier that a lot of our recumbent trikes have a lower seat height. I know that's a big concern for a lot of the riders that we have heard about. How do I get into this? How would you counter that?
I see the disadvantage of having a lower seat. It does make some of these harder to get in and out of. And to an extent, sometimes the lowest trike isn't what you're looking for, right? The rider comes in, my lowest trike isn't going to work all of the time. There are things to counteract this. I mean, we have entry aids for almost every single one of our trikes that allow you to get in and out of that trike a lot easier. And another big disadvantage I see is visibility. I mean, these are low, but we've talked in previous episodes before, bike safety flags, lights, horns, anything to be loud and kind of obnoxious, I think can counteract that lower seat.
It's easy enough to counter any sort of perceived fear or disadvantage with these. You really just got to be willing to give it a try.
To really hammer the point, that lower center of gravity outweighs all the cons, I think.
Yeah.
Personally, we have a couple trikes that have higher seating, positions on the tadpole frame, and they are more prone to tipping. Right. So if you are going to a trike because you don't want to fall over in a bike anymore, that lower of center of gravity is a benefit to you.
I keep it in mind. When you say more prone to tipping, again, we're still going to have to try pretty hard to try and tip these things over.
Still 3 wheels.
And you just maybe have to be a little bit more mindful.
It's always going to be easier to tip a 2-wheel bike than it is a trike.
Instead of having to rock yourself, you just go down.
Yeah, it was like a bike will tip just that. Yeah. The trike's going to look good, and you have to try.
Right. What some people might perceive as a disadvantage with that lower seat height and the lower seat on the lower frame of the trike, a lot of people look at that as an advantage. Instead, it's a lot easier to step over a couple inch high boom in the front of a trike as opposed to a couple foot tall bike handle and having to balance in between the pedals and do that on a bike. That's not a problem with trikes. You just get over the boom. Either you could even back into the boom and sit back in, and then you're ready to ride. There's no gymnastics involved.
I hadn't even ever thought of that, getting onto a bike and throwing my whole body over the frame.
Right.
It'd be a lot harder, than just sitting down in a recumbent seat.
Right.
Well, we're talking about 2-wheel bikes. People that never learned how to ride a 2-wheeler should really, and are looking to get into the cycling industry, there's no learning curve for a trike.
No.
You can just sit in there and ride. A lot of people never had that childhood experience of falling over 100 times to learn how to ride a 2-wheeler, and then just picking it up and getting back on there. And some people can't afford to do that now. Honestly, I wouldn't want my grandma to try to learn to ride a 2-wheeler now.
Right. You don't want to go about breaking something, but you still want to get that cycling experience. You want to get that degree of freedom, being able to be like, I want to go from my garage, I want to go from my backyard and just start riding. Like you said, it doesn't require any sort of learning, maybe figuring out gears and everything, but that's easy.
I mean, there's no learning curve to learn how to balance on a trike.
No.
I wouldn't be scared to put my grandma in one right now.
Right.
I wouldn't put her on a bike.
No,
they couldn't get me to.
I wouldn't do that. One of the key advantages of riding a recumbent trike over a bike is that anyone can ride.
I think something that's really interesting too, today we had a customer come in a wheelchair who wanted to get onto a recumbent trike. I didn't help him personally. I didn't ever catch up with you on how that ended, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, he can't really support himself with his legs, so he rides in a wheelchair for most parts. But he can take his trike and be able to ride with ease, not having any issues. Of course, he had to have some adaptations made to the pedals, but that wasn't a problem. He rides just fine.
Right. So if you had limitations, physical limitations, arms, legs, you can usually get a trike to work.
Right.
I mean, we've done it before.
Right. We want people to ride. That's what we've made Utah Trikes for. We want everyone to not only just ride a trikes, but just get out and ride, enjoy nature, enjoy, we live in a beautiful state, enjoy that and get some freedom back.
And most limitations really aren't limits on a trike.
No.
You may have those issues on a bike. Right. They're not the most friendliest. I wouldn't say everyone can hop on them and enjoy them.
Right.
A trike you can definitely make work.
Get in it, you can figure out how it works pretty easily, and then you could talk to friendly faces like us about what you want to do on it, and we'll make it work. Now, we at Utah Trikes pride ourselves in taking anyone that comes in here and getting them on a trike, no matter their capabilities. One of our most common thing that we do is going to be on the pedals. Of course, we have clipless pedals and shoes that you can go with. We even have pedals with straps over the top, or we even have our UT custom heel support pedals, which are going to be a wider platform that involve multiple straps and a heel cup that can keep you very well in there, be able to pedal easily and not have to worry about your feet shifting around out and under you.
Yeah, I mean, and it doesn't stop with just the pedals. I mean, we've made custom modified handlebars before for someone with limited use of their arms. Right. The braking situation, you don't always have to have brake levers attached to the handlebar.
Right.
In some circumstances, we've done a special coaster brake.
Yeah, one of those kickback brakes where you just pedal backwards.
Right. Something else to stop the trike from moving. And I mean, not to even mention any electric assist option or fully electric modifications if we have to go that far.
Right.
Where really you just need to get out there and enjoy them.
Again, no matter what, we want people to enjoy being out there, the beauty of cycling. If you come to us with that intention, we will make it work.
So referring back to my original question, right? I have a cyclist come in, he's looking to get into a trike, he's giving you his background, has the question, this is the kind of riding I'm doing now. Is a trike going to work for me? Are there specific things I need to look for in getting a trike? Are they all built the same?
What type of cyclist are you?
Sure.
If you're going to be more on the racing side, we have trikes for that. Anything that has a harder seat, narrower, harder tires that can run at a high pressure, we've got that. We've talked with Jan before, and he's mentioned that he's working with racing organizations that are breaking world records for speed on these trikes. Mm-hmm. So that's not a problem. If you're more looking on, I'm the off-road type. I'm riding on these single track roads that are all bumpy, all sorts of nightmare managing myself there and being comfortable. We have trikes with suspension, fatter tires. We have all sorts of tires here. I mean, you guys should see our wheel room. It's filled with all sorts of different widths and knobs there. We have pretty much any type of cyclist that you are, and you're looking for that comfort and stability. You don't have to give up, I'm also riding this way. We have trikes that are going to fit within what you're looking for. Just talk with us a little bit how you ride, what you're looking for. Again, we'll make it work for you.
Yeah, we have plenty of options to fit kind of all types of cycling.
Right.
You mentioned riding these trikes off-road. Another main concern I get from a lot of the customers, where can I ride these trikes?
Sure. With the exception of extreme off-road, I'm talking you're in the jungle, you're in the desert, you can take a trike pretty much anywhere that a bike's going to be able to go. And a big concern for people is that trikes are wider than bikes. Really, It's not that big of a deal. Most trikes are going to be about the width of your handlebars in between you, or about the same width as like a trailer that we see a lot of these cyclists taking on those single tracks. So I'll say it, anywhere that you can take a bike, you can also take a trike and be able to ride pretty happily there.
I think they fit pretty comfortably on 90% of the trails you would be taking them.
Of course. And now I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Talking about where am I going to be able to ride these? How do I transport these? How do I store these kinds of trikes and quads?
Yeah.
Well, there's trikes. How do I store the trikes?
How do you store a bike? I think they're very similar questions.
Right.
You do have to have the space for your bike and or trike. So we can do it what we do here and just leave them on the ground somewhere. We also hang them up on wall hooks.
Right.
So hanging them from a rear wheel gets them nice and out of your space. Put it up against the wall too.
It's nice. A lot of the trikes that we carry now can fold, so you can take up half the space that a trike would normally take, and that's nice. That's something to keep in mind if you're storage minded.
Yeah, and you brought up transportation. We're asked all the time about transporting these trikes. Obviously, you can fit most of them in a truck bed.
Right.
It's not going to be an issue. I see a lot of people throw them in the back of an SUV. Usually you can fit that rear wheel or the front boom between the two front seats. And I've gotten them to fit in a lot of vehicles that I wouldn't, if I didn't know, I wouldn't have guessed that it would have fit.
I can fit in my Chevy Equinox, so that
Right, exactly. And then same thing like with, bikes are mostly carried by like bike racks on the back.
Right.
There are trike racks for these. So if you need to haul them on like the outside of a vehicle, we have racks that fit in 2-inch receivers.
Trailers, of course, work as well. Of course, they would work. I see a lot of people use lawnmower trailers as a means to transport these around. There are definitely an unlimited amount of ways to move trikes around, other than just riding it.
Sure, other than just riding it to the location and then taking it out.
Right.
I think that it is important to say, because yes, you can take these trikes anywhere, right? Sure. There are some situations or cases where I wouldn't want to take a specific trike down a specific trail.
Yeah.
Right? For example, mentioning your racing trikes, I wouldn't take that racing trike off-road or in like loose terrain.
Right.
A skinny tire racing trike isn't going to give me the traction that is required to spin around in the sand.
Right.
So when that customer comes in and gives me this is where I plan on riding this trike, it's really important that he knows that the trike we're going to pick out, right? You want an off-road trike.
Right.
You want something big, fat, knobby tire that's going to sink and spin in the sand, not something that's just going to spin out in the sand like a racing trike.
Right. A lot of the trikes that we carry here are going to be general use. 90% of the people that we have are just looking for a trike that they can take out and get cruising on pavement, a little bit of off-road. But as your riding needs become more specific, so too is the specific trike you're going to need. Either off-roading, racing. Again, that's either going to be whether we customize the general use trike to be more tailored towards that one end of the spectrum or the other, or if you get a specific trike for that riding style. That comes down to you guys just chatting with us. We didn't mention any specific models in this video on purpose. This is just to create a dialogue and give you guys an idea of why should I go to a recumbent trike, and then what kind of questions to ask us as you start in your recumbent trike journey.
Of course, you're free to look at the website as well.
Of course, our newsletter and articles that we have, wonderful sources of information. Of course, we have a awesome backlog of videos that you guys can all refer to. We are surrounded by some of the best trike mechanics and people in the trike sphere in the world. So we know our stuff, and we're happy to help you get to know your stuff.
Thanks for staying tuned and watching to the end of the video. If you'd like to stay in touch, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit that bell icon, pay attention to everything we post on all our social medias as well. We'll be here every week, so keep us in mind.
Remember to relax, spin fast, and ride trikes. See you next time, everybody.
This time we're talking about what our favorite Power Rangers are. Personally, I think the red one sucks. I think
I like the green one.
I think the red one's overrated.
The green one's cool because then he becomes the red one. Shout out to Hannah.